Hi, I want to say a little bit more as a follow-up to the last video. Apologies if I repeat anything here, but um, a little bit of context. My 10-year-old niece and her younger brothers have three nephews. They're in Georgia at the moment, and I'm just thinking, that most of the victims of the Uvalde massacre were children. So I might be an outsider, but with my niece and nephews growing up there, it's on my mind about what sort of society they're growing up in. But anyway, I want to read a poem that I came across. I don't usually do this, but I thought this is worth repeating. Um, a friend of mine from Iowa posted this, and the poem is by Brian Bilston. So all credit to Brian Bilston. And this is the poem. England is a cup of tea, France a wheel of ripened brie, Greece a short squat olive tree, America is a gun, Brazil is a football on the sand, Argentina Maradona's hand, Germany an umber band, America is a gun, Holland is a wooden shoe, Hungary a goulash stew, Australia a kangaroo, America is a gun, Japan is a thermal spring, Scotland a Highland fling, oh better to be anything than America as a gun. Now, obviously, there's a bit stereotypes thrown in there, but I think it's poignant. I mean, yeah, Brazil has violence, and the other countries will have their own problems. But that's telling because this is a big part of America's international image: gun violence. I think it's honestly something people think about outsiders when they're asked about what do you think of when you think of America. Um, and it must be so frustrating and disheartening for those Americans, millions of them who know there's a problem and want to see something done about it. Um, because I think it's a misconception to say that all Americans are gun lovers. It's a country that's awash with guns, but there's many Americans, no doubt, survivors, relatives of survivors of these atrocities who are so fed up with it. And every time this happens, it must make their closure harder. So, for example, hearing about this massacre yesterday would have brought back painful memories to the Sandy Hook survivors and relatives. Um, I've got this Time magazine from 2017, October 2017. Let's hold it up. That was just after the Las Vegas mass shooting, which was the worst of modern times. And it basically has places that were the scene of mass shootings, sort of in grey. San Bernardino, Edmond, San Isidro, Kylene, Sandy Hook, Virginia Tech, Orlando, Las Vegas. And the bottom line, America's Nightmare. That's when I think Time is still quite good. I don't like the direction they've gone now with these double editions and stuff. But that's what it is. I mean, here's the big problem I have. The gun lobby and those who are very much pro Amendment and pro guns will always deflect. They'll say, I mean, literally, an American contact of mine, she had a post saying the problem is not guns, and then she went on to list other things. There's a sickness in our society with addiction, with youth alienation, and I forget everything she listed off. But yeah, those are all problems, and America certainly has those problems. But here's the problem I have with that argument. Um, the UK certainly has social problems. Japan has social problems. Australia has social problems. Um, all three countries have a much lower rate of gun violence. Why is that? I mean, in Japan, there's a serious problem of youth alienation. The suicide rate is notoriously high. Um, so they have those problems, but you don't see the same level of, you don't see young men in Japan frustrated because they're lonely go out and commit a mass shooting. Um, You don't see a drug addict in Sydney go out and commit a mass shooting. You don't see a domestic dispute in Britain, generally speaking. The last one in Plymouth was an outlier, and that was an unusual case because it is so rare. That is when a guy who was a self-described incel shot six people, including relatives, in and around a neighbourhood in Plymouth. And that was a very strange case because it felt like something more in the States. The police had given him a permit, Devon police. But the reason that was a big story is it is so rare in this country. I mean, six people being shot in a semi domestic dispute wouldn't even be news in America. It wouldn't even be national news. In Britain, it is literally about once a decade, which is actually slightly more common than it is in Australia and Japan. Now, it's been pointed out that there are other countries that have many guns. Apparently, Italy, Canada certainly has more guns than Britain, Switzerland, Germany, and those countries don't have the same level of gun violence. But I would suggest that Germany has more mass shootings than the UK does. Um, but even, we can get into the precise number of occurrences. I don't think anyone could dispute that the United States has a unique problem where it happens, this sort of large scale massacre happens several times a year. I mean, take 2022, for example, just this year, Buffalo, 10 killed, and now Uvalde, 21 killed. And that's just the worst. That's not including the many, many, many smaller incidents. So I don't see how anyone could divorce the two facts that a country awash with guns, with easy access to guns, particularly in the state of Texas, how they can argue there is no correlation. I just think that is nonsensical. I mean, in the state of Texas, in the last 5 years alone, Sutherland Springs, El Paso, Santa Fe, Uvalde, that's just in the last 5 years in one state. Um, so I mean, this isn't going to change anything. And obviously, the president has limited powers in what he can do. But it is just so sad and so frustrating to see this mindset to blame everything except guns. Now, I'm realistic. I know that guns are never going to be banned in America outright. It's never ever going to happen. And I'm not even sure that it should because there are some areas. For example, if you live in the Rockies or you live in a really rural area where there are wild animals, and let's say you're a farmer, or even if you're on that fringe of, maybe grizzly bears or wolves are present, it makes sense to have a weapon, right? I've never been against responsible gun owners, so I wouldn't entirely agree with those who think all guns should be banned because I don't think it's realistic. Also, people might have them as a legitimate way of protecting their home, right? Um, what I do not understand is a mentality, particularly in the state of Texas, of open carry, where you can legally carry a loaded firearm into a public place if it doesn't have a gun ban, just because you can. Now, my follow up there is why the hell do you need to? Why do you need to? I mean, I take the view if someone's prepared to bring a loaded weapon into a public place, they're a dangerous individual and they're prepared to use it. It's like we have a problem here with knife crime. Well, the argument is that if someone is carrying a knife, they're prepared to use it. I would make the same argument with a loaded firearm. If you're carrying a loaded firearm, you intend to use it. And they might say it's just for self-defense, but everyone will say that. It'll be interesting to see what comes out with this latest shooting, what his motivation was, if he was being bullied, if it was rejection from girls, a family dispute. But to be honest, whatever the issue is, it wouldn't matter because the easy access to guns is the problem. Not surprisingly, he legally purchased his firearm. So, the pro gun lobby would say, well, banning guns won't work because most of these atrocities, actually, they contradict themselves because to say if you ban guns, it doesn't punish criminals, it only punishes the good guys with the gun. But who, this is the problem, who gets to say who is? I mean, this guy might have no criminal record. It'll remain to be seen what comes out, but more often than not, mass shooters don't actually have a criminal record. They're not gang members, they're not, um, they don't have a long criminal record more often than not. So the issue then gets into, well, what is the vetting process? I would say a big tell would be if they're expressing extreme politics online or if they're expressing frustrations. I think there should be much better vetting of mental health for sure. I mean, I don't think any of the other issues should be used to deflect from the problem, but so long as America does have so many guns, then there is going to be overlap. Because, like I say, if someone in this country has a frustration at the workplace, maybe they'll lash out. There might be a fist fight, or they might, quit, or they might even take legal action against the boss or something like that. What will not happen in the United Kingdom is they will go in frustration and shoot the place up. It just does not happen. Or at least when it does, it is so rare that it is a big story. Um, so I worry about I mean, I've always been perplexed by this, but ever since my family moved over there, it concerns me. It really does, and I don't know how I would process that. I'm close to my nieces and nephews, um, particularly the older ones, because the younger ones, actually, one of them was born in the States. But I don't know. I mean, I feel I feel such sympathy for those Americans who want to see something happen, but it won't because Congress will not act. I mean, it must be so disheartening for the survivors of these atrocities to see that it's the same old, same old. It's thoughts and prayers, and then back to the next one, and it is the norm in America, unfortunately. But the question is, should it be? And here's the thing I was also thinking about: this has not always been the case in America. I mean, it seems to be a relatively recent phenomenon. Relatively. Um, if you look at even the 1970s, now what you had in the 70s there was very high crime rates in American cities, which was a specific problem. There was issues around racial tensions, poverty, and so on. If you look at the peak homicide rates of most American cities, it tended to be in the 1970s. So that was a particular kind of crime. But there didn't seem to be the frequency of mass shootings back then. If you look at the worst mass shootings in America, they've all been in recent years. I mean, Columbine is sort of the template, but it's been surpassed many times over. So clearly, something has happened in recent decades that is a specific problem. Um, I can't, unless I'm mistaken, there wasn't sort of mass gun violence in the 50s and early 60s and the 40s. There would have been, of course, there would have been violence, there would have been racial violence, there would have been familicides, where you had this sort of incident within a domestic setting, but this sort of public mass shooting, I would say it is something that has happened in the last, probably since the 1980s onwards. And it may be that the NRA has got more powerful. It may be a range of factors. I don't think America will ever be free from gun violence ever, but I do believe it can be reduced to the point where this sort of frequency is greatly reduced, and when it does happen, it's a rarity rather than the norm. I'm an outsider, and I despair of the situation. I mean, not many people seriously argue all guns should go, but even gun owners, if you're truly a responsible gun owner, why would you be against reasonable background checks? I mean, why would you be against the idea of an 18-year-old who perhaps has had mental health problems, being denied access to a firearm, whereby he could act on that. Why would you be against that? That makes no sense. Why would you be against someone convicted of domestic violence having access to a gun? Why would you be against someone with on the extreme political fringes? You know, whether they be a white supremacist or a black supremacist or any other fringe group. Why should they have access to a firearm where they could seriously act on it? It makes no sense to me.